Welcome, everybody, for tuning in to another one of our VAFF industry panels. Today, we are at the panel called Secret to Becoming a DGC Director at the 24th Annual Vancouver Asian Film Festival, brought to you virtually. And I'm very, very excited to bring to you an amazing panel of speakers. My name is Lynn Lee. I'm the festival director. Let's begin by acknowledging the land we are gathered on and broadcasting from is the unceded traditional territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. We're also very happy to welcome guests from the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This panel is sponsored by Creative BC and DGC BC. We noticed that a lot of filmmakers really would love to make a career out of being a film director, but it's always been very hard for them to become unionized, and that really is the ticket to a long, stable career. And especially in BC, there has been a trend where we don't see a lot of Asian representation behind the camera on the director's chair. And therefore, we brought a panel together and with the support from DGCBC to discuss and explore how we actually can increase that representation and invite panelists to explore what are the tips to actually be able to become a union director. And interestingly, we actually got a lot of guests from Ontario. I'm very excited to introduce our moderator for today, who will introduce all our panelists from BC and Ontario. And our moderator is Arnold Lim. He is an award-winning Korean-Canadian filmmaker who's won Telefilm's Talent to Watch twice. And he's directing his feature All in Madonna, which just got into the Whistler Film Festival. Very, very excited for him. And to produce a web series named Best Friend Me in 2021. And in addition to being a juror and programmer for the Victoria and Vancouver Asian Film Festival, Arnold has also awarded a Bravo Fact grant, a BC Arts Council grant, selected to the National Screen Institute's Features First program and the Harold Greenberg Fund's Short to Features grant. So please join me in welcoming Arnold, and he will introduce all our panelists today.
Thank you so much, Lynn. One of the mandates at VAFF is to foster opportunities for filmmakers and help them succeed. So with that in mind, it's my pleasure to present our next industry panel, The Secret to Becoming a DGC Director. I'm excited to introduce to our four panelists today, but first I'd like to start by asking our audience members, do you have any burning questions for our panelists? If so, feel free to leave your questions in the live chat section, and we will answer as many as we can during the live broadcast. So first, I'd like to introduce someone that many of you probably already know. He's an Emmy-nominated director, Zach Lipovsky. Zach was elected Director Representative at the chair of the Director Advisor Committee at the DGC British Columbia. You may be familiar with his work, including MechX4, Kim Possible, and Freaks, which was the biggest Canadian sale at TIFF in 2018 and released in over 100 theaters. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zach.
Hey, super excited to be here. This has been a panel I've been looking forward to all year, so very excited to have the conversation.
Thank you, Zach. Next up is Sharon Lee. Sharon is the award-winning director of short films Benjamin and The Things You Think I'm Thinking. Her TV credits include Murdoch Mysteries, Kim's Convenience, Hudson and Rex, Corner, Odd Squad, Dino, Dana, and Endlings. Sharon, we're excited to have you today.
Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here.
All right, so next up we have Tiffany Xiang. Tiffany is a multi-award winning filmmaker garnering a Canadian Screen Award, a DuPont Columbia, Peabody, a Busan, and was selected as one of the Doc New York City's 40 Under 40 for 2020. So most recently, she received the inaugural TIFF Share Her Journey Shortcuts Award for her documentary, Sing Me a Lullaby, and is the second vice chair of DGC Ontario's executive board. We welcome Tiffany to our panel today.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
And last and certainly not least, we have Jeff Chan. Jeff is he has actually really a great story, and I'm looking forward to asking him about it. He's the founder of the Toronto-based film and television production company Collective Pictures. In 2016, Jeff released a short film version of Code 8, an original IP that generated over $3 million in crowdfunding. Using that momentum from the short, Jeff went on to independently direct and produce the Code 8 feature, which was released theatrically and on Netflix. Thank you so much for joining us here, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to have this discussion with everyone.
Yeah, so let's start with Zach. I think one of the interesting things about the DGC is that a lot of people don't actually know what the DGC does. And up until recently, to be quite honest, I would say that I was probably in that category as well. What are the benefits? Like, you know, I called you one time and actually had to ask you and spent 45 minutes with you where you explained all the benefits that the DGC offered, and I would say that 90% of them I didn't know anything about. So can you tell us a little bit about the mandate? What does the DGC do, and what benefits do they offer?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I was the same as you. The first time I joined the DGC, it was because someone handed me a piece of paper and said, sign this, and suddenly I was a DGC member, and I didn't really know what that meant, and I didn't for many years. But the DGC is first and foremost, it's a guild, it's a union. So what it does is represent its members' rights with the producers. So it negotiates with producers to figure out the contract that we all agree. How much you get paid and all, how long your director's cut is, and all the different rights that that you have as a director. The guild also does stuff like making sure the producers contribute to the DGC healthcare plan and your pension, and all sorts of things become important as you grow up as a filmmaker. You because you're a freelancer, you don't have an employer giving you a healthcare plan or paying your pension. The guild makes the employers contribute to that stuff on your behalf. And for many years, that's kind of where the DGC kind of stopped, was basically making sure your dentist was taken care of and making sure your retirement was taken care of. But the last few years, we've taken a much more active role in accelerating the members' careers, doing more to increase representation within the industry, promoting our members, training our members, basically taking a much more active role in the director's career so that they have long, successful kind of filmmaking and television careers, and also do a lot of advocacy, the government, and even with studios and networks down in LA. For example, the thing that was just tabled in front of the government earlier this week with the CRTC, the DGC was heavily involved in sort of the consultation with government, and a lot of the stuff that was tabled with the government there was direct language from what the DGC has been telling them has been needed for like 10 years. So it defends directors' rights, but more really, and a lot of what I can talk more is specifically, I know much more about BC because that's where I'm based, but we take a really active role in doing all sorts of training and promotion and creating opportunities for directors.
It's interesting that you talk about creating opportunities for directors, but one of the important things that I think that I didn't really understand was that it's not, they're not your agents. They don't necessarily go out and quote unquote find work for you. So for a cost of approximately $2,000 to get started and enter into the guild, how do you, in your mind, justify the cost of $2,000 for someone who may be just entering into the business?
Yeah, it's definitely, it can be a steep price tag. It's a lot cheaper than the DGA, it's like $12,000. But there is a way that a lot of indie filmmakers are unaware of called I think it's called the Indie Filmmaker Initiative, where you can join the guild without paying the $2,000 entry fee if you have an indie film, a feature film that's played at any of the kind of Academy listed film festivals. And there's quite a few, like tons of them are Canadian. So if you've had an indie film, and that was because there was a barrier to entry for a lot of filmmakers, unless you were already getting big studio network stuff, it wasn't feasible for you to join. But now if you've had an indie film play at a few festivals, you can probably join without paying that fee, which was specifically designed to solve that problem and to help with representation. Beyond that, the guild we're about to launch. We've already launched in British Columbia something called directors.ca, which is a really powerful website and basically search in, kind of like Airbnb, but for directors, to help basically decision makers find directors. And we're in the process of scaling that across the entire country so that it becomes basically the go-to destination for anyone who's looking to hire a director. And a big part of that website that we've built into it is allowing members to self-identify for the purpose of employment, which has been a really big struggle for a lot of members, because in a lot of places that's illegal. Even though we all know that who a director is and what their ethnicity is, what their sexuality is, what their gender is, what the country they came from, any of those elements play into a huge part into why you might want to hire a director. But for a long time, because of the Human Rights Code, it's illegal to consider those things. But we've, as the DGC, gotten a special program through the Human Rights Tribunal to allow any member to self-identify any of their protective traits for the purpose of employment, if they so choose. And to provide that information to employers, which, and I can tell you, a lot of the traffic on directors.ca is employers looking for visible minorities and women and all the different ways, all the different elements of underrepresented groups, looking for those new voices for specific projects where that makes sense. Like, for example, we had a project called The Terror in Vancouver, which is all about Japanese internment camps. And they said they couldn't find any Japanese directors. And so they brought them up from the US. So we're really trying to make sure that of our directors who have, that they're as visible so that they can get those opportunities. And those are the type of things that being in the Guild can really help with. But it hasn't always been that way. So I'm really excited to hear from the rest of the panelists sort of what the obstacles have been and what more we can do.
Right. Tiffany, just so that the audience members know what some of the ways to get into the Guild are, can you give us a Coles Notes version of how a non-member can approach preparing or working towards become a member of the DGC? Is it a process? What do they need to prepare? How does an up-and-coming director become a member of the DGC?
Well, I had a unique approach. I mean, I just wanted to add on to what Zach said, in like some of these different initiatives that have been taking place right now, is that with documentary this year, we actually had a free first year for doc filmmakers. And obviously you have to have X amount of credits applied to you. But that first year we were waiving that initial fee, which is tremendous. And obviously doc filmmakers compared to fiction filmmakers, there's a bit of a price gap there in terms of how much we make. So I'm happy to say that because of that initiative, we've gotten a significant amount of new membership, which is encouraging and great. And we want to keep those members part of the Guild. There's still fees, annual fees that we have to pay into, and dues as well. But we hope that when doc filmmakers do join the DGC, that they stay and that they can see the benefits of it, and they can see that, being part of the union, besides the, for me personally, the incredible benefits that have to go with being part of the Guild, is to also see the camaraderie as well, to be part of a community. Because I would say that, I'm not sure as much for fiction directors, but for documentaries specifically, it can feel quite isolating and be on your own for most of the time. A little bit masochistic when you're in documentary. And for all the doc filmmakers out there, I joined the Guild in a unique way, in such that kind of maybe similar to Zach, my first feature-length documentary was with the National Film Board, and that kind of automatically was had to be a signatory project, right, with the DGC as well as the WGC. So that kind of allowed me to have a credit that will allow me to be qualified to be able to be part of the Guild. And through that, I was approached by one of the DGC people there, Hans, who is incredible, and he reached out to me and during my Hot Docs world premiere there, and we talked about whether or not the Guild would be something that I'd be considered to joining. And after a great luncheon, I felt like this was probably the next step I wanted to take with my career. And I don't want to I don't want to glaze over the fact that yes, the fees are high, especially if you aren't bringing in the amount of money that you want to, and that the producers can't play into your contracts, which then means that your benefits don't reflect that. And I think that it is important to kind of see whether or not this is the right time for you to join the guild. I think that that's also a real conversation, because even if it isn't the right time and you do join anyhow, there's obviously ways you could take a pause as well. It doesn't mean that you fully give up your membership, but it just means that you're just taking a pause. And I think that there are so many different ways that the guild can be flexible once you join as well, as to, and they also were incredibly flexible during the whole COVID while we're still in it to actually waive some of the dues as well. So that was a great break for most of us filmmakers out there.
Amazing. Sharon, you have a laundry list of really amazing directing credits, and I want to ask you a little bit about your origin story. Tell me a little bit about how you became a director. What was your journey, and how did you know that it was time to join the DGC?
Yeah, so a really good question. I think I do wonder if there's another story that isn't the story, but I joined the guild because I got a job. That was a DGC show. I was a kids show called Dino Dana, and so automatically I entered the guild because I had to, and have been a member since. Before I entered the guild, I never once thought about being in the DGC. I knew it was a thing that existed. I knew that eventually it was probably going to be in my life, and I was probably going to be a member, but it was never a goal for me to be a member. It wasn't something that I was kind of dreaming of. Yeah, and to answer your earlier question, my journey was coming from an entire childhood of wanting to be an actor, and going to business school, and still wanting to be an actor, and then directing for the first time, doing a play in university, and then realizing that I wanted to direct. And then I just, because of my business background, I started working in production and did my own kind of film school on the side, and just made a whole bunch of films. And kind of just chipped away. My focus has always been growth, I guess, for me. Just what's the next thing I want to do that I haven't done that I'm interested in, but also that's gonna help me grow as a person and as a filmmaker. And I guess luckily it led me to the path that I'm on, and into the DGC.
Do you feel like the DGC has kind of locked in and been a part of that growth and has helped support that growth as you move forward?
I think when Tiffany was talking about the loneliness, it's quite the same for fiction directors. Probably not to the same extent, but directors we work alone. We don't have fellow directors. There's often only one director on each project. So coming into the DGC, I met Jeff at the DGC, and then met Tiffany at a film festival, but then kept running into each other at the DGC. So as filmmakers, we're also often really busy, and the Directors Guild bring people. They bring people together for networking events, for panels, and things like that. So it just kind of helps you come out of your hole a little and connect with people that you like, and kind of foster those relationships.
Great. So Jeff, I want to talk to you about your story. You have a really interesting story, and I know a little bit about it, but I wanted to hear it from you. You started with Code 8, the short, and that was one of the keys on your journey to becoming a director. Can you share your journey with us and how you became a director with the DGC?
Thanks for having me. Very similar to, I think, a lot of the other panelists. I think when I was in film school, I at one point looked into joining the DGC because I thought at that point, like the way to become a director was you join the union and then you work your way up as like a third AD and a second AD and a first AD, and then you graduate to becoming a director. And I quickly learned that that wasn't the case in terms of how the industry worked. So, my focus then shifted really more onto making kind of independent films and short films, just trying to get, noticed. And it wasn't until my second movie that basically, similar to someone gave me a piece of paper and was like, sign this, you're joining the DGC. And then I didn't really know what that meant. But what I quickly learned is when I joined that, there's really a great community there, and immediately I felt very welcome. And, it was one of those things that, I didn't really understand the value of it until I joined, and I was able to kind of, get to meet all these other fantastic directors and filmmakers, and understand a lot more how the union kind of protects its memberships, not just directors, but, a lot of people who work on productions. So that's kind of how I got in. But, in terms of answering the original question, my start actually came from doing the MAM, Mighty Asian Movie Making Festival for VAFF, many years ago. That was my first film that I co-directed actually at the time. And for those who don't know, it's a 7-day kind of like a short film contest, and it kind of gave me my start. So that's kind of how I first got into this. It wasn't ever, I think I did that and I was like, I really enjoy this. Like, I didn't have plans to become a filmmaker. And then I was like, maybe I can look at going to, film schools, and, the journey kind of just evolved from that point forward.
Right. So we actually have our first question. I just want to touch on that now. So the question is from Henry J. Ma. And his question is, I'm an actor. Can I join the DGC? So maybe I'll throw that to Tiffany or Zach.
I would no, but if you do other things in film, like if you are an AD or director or production designer, in the other roles, absolutely, you can look into seeing whether or not your credits apply to be able to join the guild or to even be an apprentice of the guild as well. But unfortunately, not just for actors. I believe ACTRA and I think Zach, maybe you could speak to other guilds or unions that
in Vancouver. Yeah, I mean, I think the two, just to be super clear, the two ways into the guild is either you're hired on a job as a director. So if that's your first job and you've never directed before, as long as you're hired as the director on that job, you're basically immediately come into, which is how a lot of us joined in our first jobs. So, for example, sometimes actors are on a series and then they want to direct an episode of that series, and so they might be an actor who's promoted to being director, and in that moment they would join the DGC. If it's not your first job, but you do have, I think it's 75 minutes of commercially exhibited work, then you qualify and you can pay the entry fee. It can either be doc work or fictional work. And then the other way, like I said, is you've had a feature that's played at prominent film festivals. If it's played at 2 of the festivals on the list, then you can join. And in that case, they waive the entry fee. And there was another question just about if entry fee is $2,000 a year. I think it's $2,500 once. And then, as Tiffany was saying, there's some dues each year that are that's less. I think it's around $800 a year or something, but it's paid out each quarter.
Yes. $7.49.50. I know it's exactly that amount. $187.50 every quarter. That's what it is. Come on, we all get that notification when our dues are. But the dues are different for directors and production manager and so on and so forth for the different categories. Directors is definitely the highest in the dues as well. There was a question around, does this restrict work on indie films for little to no pay? And that's a good thing also to talk about and discuss in terms of what we call dispensation, to submit dispensation on smaller projects. I believe the amount is under Zach, maybe you could correct me, under 700,000. If it's a smaller indie project, you could apply for a dispensation and say that you still want to work on this project. And that just means, what that means is basically the union is not going to, can't get involved in terms of like if something happens, like a brick falls on your foot and no one wants to pay you, for insurance and such like that. Like the union can't really come in and help you figure things out and run guild standards and be able to get you the support that you need. That's what really the dispensation is basically kind of like saying that, don't worry, I still want to do this project, but I'm freeing the guild in its responsibility of looking out for me, basically, if anything were to go wrong.
But unlike a lot of other unions, the guild is the guild's never going to step in your way and tell you can't do a smaller project, especially if it's a project that you're passionate in and that it's your own. I know a lot of acting unions will try and stop you from doing your own projects and smaller projects, which I think is crazy. But the guild is very pro our members creating their own work and not being in the way. But like Tiffany said, we want to make sure they're protected. So the only times that the guild might sort of force a production to make sure that it is, if it does qualify, or warn members not to, is if the producer involved has a long track record of maybe not paying their crew or bad things. They will notify the people involved that you should be cautious, because at that point the guild can't protect you.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in there and say this. I mean, at the same time, like, yes, the guild absolutely wants to support, people's passion projects and to ensure that you do the work that you want to do. But at the same time, it's also to really look at the bigger picture across Canada and our industry. I mean, I think that, as I spoke earlier about, being a director sometimes can be a bit of a masochistic task of like just throwing every bit of you into this industry and to like do everything for zero pay. And it could be really taxing on your mental health, on every being, because you just want to make it, and so you'll do anything. And I think what the guild is trying to do is to also create a standard for us so that we aren't shortchanged and underpaid by producers and productions and take advantage of up and coming directors and being like, oh, they'll work for half of the rate. Why don't we hire so-and-so versus Zach, who is part of the, and so I feel like there needs to be also this collective conversation around how do we stand up for our basic human rights of just getting paid properly, because we always work more than an 8-hour normal workday for, I guess, in different industries, and we take often work home with us, that we don't count those hours either. And so I think at the end of the day, we're trying to, in the long term, and the bigger thinking is trying to find a healthier way where indie filmmakers, independent filmmakers aren't being taken advantage of, and that we can be supported. And there is finding that balance between that and like the passion projects that really just don't have the fees to be able to have a signatory project, essentially.
So I want to segue from that into one of our questions, actually. And this question number 3 is from Roisin Abbott. I apologize for the pronunciation of that. I'm sure I did not get that right. But the question here is, at what stage in your career is the best time to join the DGC? Does anyone want to take that one?
Well, I can just quickly say I would say most directors join when they get their first job. That's sort of the most usual time. But if you're who's considering joining on your own before you get a specific job that would qualify you, and that does happen, and I've had some friends recently join because of that, I would say it's at a time where you feel like you're right on the cusp of jumping into that commercial part of the industry. So you've just had some work that has got you noticed, that shows the type of stuff that you really want to make. Either you've just got an agent or you're ready to get an agent. You're sort of right at that moment where you have enough of a body of work that it seems likely that you could be considered for commercial projects where people would either hire you to do a low budget television show or an MOW or your first feature like that, because then the guild can kind of step in and do certain things, kind of help bring a spotlight to you. You can participate in networking events that we run to meet agents, to meet producers. So it's sort of at the moment where you feel like you have, I would say, where you have enough work where you're ready, and also where the $2,500 entry fee isn't a burden. Like that shouldn't be taking food off your table. And hopefully you have an indie film where it can be waived. But I would say not so early that entry fee is a burden, but right at the point you're ready for the next step would be my suggestion.
And that's an interesting point. So one of the big ways that Canadians are able to get their projects off to the ground is actually through the grant structure in Canada. Canada is very good about that. We're actually very fortunate in Canada to have some of the opportunities that we have here, which don't exist in many other countries. One of those opportunities is Telefilm's Talent to Watch project, which is something that I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to participate in. So maybe Tiffany or Zach, where does the Talent to Watch kind of fit into that question of what stage in your career is the best time to join the DGC? Is it like before or after that? Would that be a nice segue in, or do you think further, quote unquote, seasoning after that is probably something that you would look to as well?
I mean, I would just say, like, echoing what Zach said, you kind of don't, I mean, kind of want to make sure that you have work lined up so that, it's not just, but there's two ways of looking at it. Like for me, I think that, as I mentioned, it isn't just about, the health benefits, which is, I think it's a huge thing. And also really great to tell your parents that you have benefits. They're like, what does that mean? Who's doing that? And somehow it just legitimizes the work that we do. I remember when I told my mom that, that I got benefits for like a massage therapy and like a psychologist. And she's like, oh, wow. That sounds like a real job now that you which is terrific. And it's nothing, like, at the end of the day, I would say that our industry needs it the most, almost, because we are all on our feet for 24/7, and there is a lot of mental health stress to go along with this job. In terms of the telefilm question, I think there's two ways of looking at it. I think that if you want to build your network and build your roster, I think there's a lot of incredible programs that, in DGC Ontario, there's a lot of meet your match, with other producers, showrunners, and network executives. These initiatives, these one-on-one, these are invaluable. These are great places where you actually start pitching your next projects that's more intimate and not in like the mad rush of a festival circuit, And I think it's great. I've met tons of people through the Meet Your Match and be able to stay in contact with them and follow up, and they know what I'm doing, and you're putting a face to somebody. Next time you want to email them a note and tell them what you're doing next, it's not just like a cold email. So I think that even if you don't have the next gig or a television opportunity to direct, I think that you can look at some of the initiatives that the DGC runs and be like, you know what, I can fully take advantage of all the things in 1 year. And you could give yourself that like 1 year mark and be like, in this 1 year, I want to do X, Y, and Z and get this out of the guild and participate in all of these things. And then therefore, the amount of money that I'm paying for that first fee, this will all balance out. But you really have to take advantage of that. You can't expect that someone is going to hold your hand through it and be like, encourage you to do it. There will always be notifications and things to sign up for, but you really have to want to actively take part in it and sign up. And actually, when things were more physical, to go to these events, because there are tons of great parties and events. At least I could only speak for the Ontario chapter here. There's just incredible initiatives every month that allow you to meet new people and to sign up for things. And that alone can be worth your while, especially if you are breaking out new into the industry, or maybe you've been in the industry for a really long time. Like, let's say you've been a documentary filmmaker for the last 15, 20 years, but you really want to transition into fiction. And so really, again, this is just another way to kind of boot camp into the guild and into meeting different people, specifically fiction people that you haven't had the opportunity to meet just based on, the genre that you've stuck into as well. So I think that there's different approaches and looking into it, but like what Zach said, you kind of also need to make sure you can afford the annual fees and the dues as well.
Maybe I'll turn to Sharon and Jeff. Have you had the opportunity to attend some of these Meet Your Match or workshops, and have they offered benefits to you? Neither of you are necessarily directly associated with being a spokesperson with the DGC. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience there?
Sure.
No pressure. Yeah.
Sharon, would you like to go first, or do you want me to dive in?
Go for it, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a few Meet Your Matches, and they're fantastic. I think there's two parts. Number one is getting a sense of all the different producers that are out there, and kind of what they're up to. I think the other part of it is, at these events, I think the best relationships that I've made is actually meeting other directors and just kind of hearing their stories, and getting a sense of a community of people who are kind of pushing for the same things that you're pushing to. So those events have been great and been really helpful.
Sharon?
Yeah, so I think for sure, like the DGC, I've done a lot of great events with the DGC. I've met a lot of people. They have training sessions. They have all kinds of, meeting the network executives, meeting other directors. But I guess I just want to talk a little bit about the timing of joining the DGC, because I do think it is, I just want to say that, like, you don't have to rush, it's there for you, and you can build the relationships with the DGC representatives and call them, ask questions, make sure you're ready. But I don't think that it's necessary to be in the guild to advance your career to the point where you just get a job that gives you that opportunity, because it is expensive. And there are so many organizations out there that allows you to have that kind of community outside of the DGC as well. So there are other ways you can build and network and make your films and really focus. I think somebody asked about how do you get upgraded to a director? You can't get upgraded to a director. You have to kind of come in already as a filmmaker and have the credits. And that's something that you have to work on for yourself, either through Talent to Watch or whatever. Like, you can, as long as you make a film that gets people's attention or get a job somehow. And I think that's the reason why all of us here entered the guild through a job, because it didn't make sense to enter.
Right. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I just want to say I totally agree with that. And I think, especially for me when I first started, there was a lot of emphasis in, what is, I think, it kind of goes to the root of the question. It's like, how does someone become a director, right? And I think, when you start off, you're just looking for something to grab onto, and the DGC is a very obvious, and clear path, and it's a great organization, and there's a lot of resources. And I think even as you're starting out, it's great to be in touch with it, and great to, potentially even join it. Ultimately, though, I think the journey to, at least for me and a lot of the filmmakers that I talk to, it's really been about making stuff. There's no resume or there's no checkbox that's going to allow you to just kind of like get hired. It's kind of a weird business where it's almost like, I had my high school teacher, I remember asking him, just, Phil Byrne, really great teacher, and taught me a lot about the industry. And I remember asking him, how do you become a director if no one will give you a job? And he's like, well, you should learn how to produce and then hire yourself. and I was like, what are you talking about? I have to learn how to produce and direct. And I think, what that really meant was, like, you just want to find a way to get a group of people that, it's a great when you can start this off as a hobby before it becomes a job, right? And I think the best way to becoming a filmmaker is to find a way where you can constantly apply yourself to love what you do, and find a group of people that you can just make projects with. And you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be super strategic. It could just be stuff that you're just going to have fun making. And I think a lot of the DGC stuff, as you progress through the career, it becomes, I find that the more and more I progress, the more and more obvious it became, why it was helpful and beneficial, And by the time I got in, I was like, oh my God, this is like the most amazing thing ever. But I think if I had joined really early and I had that expectation on the DGC to be the platform on which, my career would advance, I think that would also be, could create some challenges potentially.
Thank you for that, Jeffo. We have another question that I want to get to, and this question comes to us from Harrison Hood. So Harrison's question is, what's considered commercially exhibited, which is, I think, one of the words that Zach mentioned. And he asked, do film festivals count? So maybe Zach or Tiffany can take one of that.
Yeah, so I think commercially exhibited means it's been either in theaters or television or streaming platform. There was another question about, is it in aggregate? So like if you've made, I don't know, 75 1-minute shorts that have been on TV, then that would count. So we've had members that, have had docs screen and but as far as the question of if festivals count, I don't actually think so, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Tiffany knows.
Yeah. So with festivals, it just needs to be one of the qualified festivals as well. And for all like the minutiae, like really fine line details, I encourage everyone, if they're interested, to go on the dgc.ca website and under the joining as a director and then the various other roles and fields as well. It can tell you all the details to it, but you can at least have an independent, if you're an independent feature filmmaker and you have one feature film and it's programmed in at least 2 of the film festivals on the Academy of Canadian Cinema, like it's recognized within the last 5 years, that would make you qualified and eligible to apply for a DGC membership.
And a note on that, little plug for ourselves here, the Vancouver Asian Film Festival just happens to be one of those film festivals. So
Yeah.
Represent. I was hoping one of you would bring that up so I wouldn't have to bring it up.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
That's right. I'm sorry I did that. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that, Tiffany. So I want to move on. There's a couple more questions in the queue here, but I want to move on through a couple of the things. First of all, I want to speak a little bit to diversity in membership. Now, I had a good conversation with Zach about this earlier, and he talked to me a little bit about the numbers and the metrics of diversity. So, Zach, can you tell me a little bit about the diversity in your membership, and what are the numbers of directors of Asian heritage in your membership at the DGC, and how it compares against our populations here in BC and Canada?
Yeah, so this is something I'm really passionate about, is kind of trying to make data as public as possible so that it just, it creates the conversation. And it's something we're actually going to start doing more often with the DGC, is actually publishing all of our demographic information and industry information so that everyone can kind of look at it and see how it's evolving or not evolving in some cases. On the Asian filmmaker side of it is the part that really shocked me the most, because we looked at and again, this is just self-identified members, because we don't require people to identify any protective traits, but if they choose to, we look at that percentage. And in the last survey we did, 85% of the DGC membership was Caucasian, compared to sort of the population in BC being closer to 50%. And specifically the Asian community in BC, the population is quite high compared to other parts of the country. So in BC, it's about 5%, but in Vancouver itself, in the Lower Mainland, the cities around Vancouver, it's as high as 40% of the population is Asian. Yet we only see our membership in the director side of things being 5% of the membership. So it's to me, it's pretty troubling when we have 40% of the population being, and Asian is a broad term. Obviously, there's a lot of countries that we're including South Asian and other places. So it's troubling when we have such a huge population of the city identifying as Asian, yet only 5% of the membership being Asian. Now, obviously, one of the obstacles we face as a guild is most people join when they get a job, and so having them join isn't necessarily up to the guild; it's up to the employers, and there might be biases there that are an obstacle for Asian filmmakers that are keeping them out from joining. But we're part of this panel, and part of the discussion I'm hoping to have is discuss what more we can do to make sure we're opening up the conversation to the Asian community. I mean, I have so many friends that are Asian filmmakers that I think are the most talented filmmakers in the city. And I have a lot of great friends who are Asian directors. And so I've always been trying to figure out how we can increase the representation in the Guild itself so that it looks a lot more like the city and the product that we live in here.
That's really interesting. And what I wanted to get to there was the numbers seem a little bit stark. So in a province featuring 25% of our population being of Asian heritage, only 5% of the DGC population being of Asian heritage, I guess the question comes, why are those numbers so low? And one of the things that was interesting to me was all of you who got into the DGC, as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, through a first job being a DGC project. And if the numbers of Asians getting into the DGC is quite low, is there a correlation? Is it causation correlation between Asian directors not getting those first jobs and getting into the director's chair? Is that something that can be looked at? I mean, I'm just asking questions. So your thoughts, Tiffany?
Oh, Arnold, I think that's a fantastic thing to raise. And it's, I think this conversation should have happened decades ago, but here we are now. And I think that this time is very important because we are not going to shy away from, the pink elephant in the room and to say those jobs, yeah, majority of them do go to white directors. And that has been historically understood. And yes, definitely that would then, as you did the math, that would mean that if there are less, let's say Asian or BIPOC filmmakers that are being hired, then yes, there will be then less people to then be in the guild that identify as Asian directors or BIPOC directors. With that being said, that's also, there are producers and productions that would argue, oh, there's not enough, I can't find any, or, the pool is so small, so, we tried, but there's more of these. So there's all these reasons and of where they look and where they've seen. And I think that's why director.ca is phenomenal. It's the initiative that started out in the DGC in BC, which I know soon in Ontario, we will be able to put up our profiles as well. But I would also like to talk about, when we talk about systemic racism and the hiring in the workforce, not just in our industry, but across the board in a lot of industries, we also have to look at, as well as, why would an Asian person, 15-year-old, 12-year-old want to even think about, in post-secondary or wherever after high school that they want a career in film when they don't see many of us there to look, or their parents don't. Like, let's just be honest. When I told my parents I wanted to be in film, I mean, yeah, I was a middle child and definitely very stubborn and refused to do anything else. But with that being said, I think that it's hard for parents to, especially, parents who are, first gen, immigrants into Canada, to be like, yeah, that seems like a fruitful future for my child. Yeah, let's put them in film school, or let's encourage them to go into this, very obscure future that really doesn't have like a clear 100% path, and I think that also becomes a reason why the pool is very small as well. There are still a lot of Asian directors out there to be hired 100%, but the number isn't that as large as, I would say, white directors, so to speak. And I think a big part of that is also, it's kind of the domino effect. And anyone here can also just jump in and chime in on this. But for me, I think that we should also talk about, how we are, being, oh my God, my nephew's here. Just, but yeah, a big part of it is to see, like, how do we take up space? How do we take up space so that our faces and our presence is being noticed, so that it can encourage a next generation of filmmakers to feel inspired to, take this on as a career path, And I think when you see more of that, then we will see a shift. I already seen a bit of a shift since I was in film school, you know, and since I was a teenager, and what I saw out there, you know, on the television screen. I mean, if I had Kim's Convenience growing up, I think things would be a lot different for me, you know. And I think that a big part of why I even got into this industry was that I was sick and tired of trying to find, you know, some relations between myself and like 90210 and Melrose Place and Friends, you know, like it was just being sick and tired of waiting for the shift to happen and wanting to be part of that. And that's like the same reason why I stayed being with the DGC. I'm a documentary filmmaker. Work comes very differently than mine. We usually have to make our own work and put our work out there, you know, and not oftentimes are they DGC signatory. But for me, I have a strong belief in, you know, staying in a guild so that I can also represent and be part of a change and a solution. And that's what led me into wanting to run and go for second vice chair of the DGC Ontario Executive Board. Because again, our voices need to be heard, not just, you know, in the grounds as members, but also around the executive board. Representation needs to happen, because if there is, like, you know, people around the table making those decisions and looking at policies and looking at initiatives to push forward and to help and encourage, there should be people like us around that table to be able to champion the things that I personally have struggled with, as well as other members that I know also struggle. And some of these questions that you've raised as well is a big thing for me to also push forward and to see change in those fields.
So I just wanted to say, like, yeah, all of those things that Tiffany has mentioned is totally on point, and we definitely have a lot of work to do to make space for ourselves. But I do think that, you know, just going back to the fact that we're expected as directors specifically to make work for ourselves, that's a huge privilege that we have. You know, you have to have the resources, the money, the time. If you're trying to, you know, pay for food and rent, and you're not going to be able to create work like that. So it's a privilege. If you're making movies, it's because you can, and it's not an equal playing field. So I think there's a responsibility for organizations like the DGC to recognize that there are people who aren't able to come to the table, who don't have the resources, and it comes from the generational you know, domino effect that Tiffany was talking about, because our parents, a lot of directors or people who work in this business are children of people who work in this business. And for us, you know, I'm an immigrant, that just doesn't happen. And so you don't have that support, even the knowledge that this can be possible, right? So yeah, just to acknowledge that it's not possible for everybody to do this.
I really agree with that. And, you know, I think, you know, one of the things that has to be said just in general is that this is a brutal business and industry. And if you want to be a filmmaker, it's not a choice to become a filmmaker and it happens overnight. Like, I would actually say that it's a decision, it's a lifestyle decision, especially in your 20s, you know, when you first start out. When I graduated from film school, you know, it was pretty scary. And, you know, I had a lot of, I was very lucky to have, you know, my parents help me and extended family help me. That was a position that I'm just really grateful to have had. At the same time, you know, with my family and a lot of people in my life, they didn't really always understand the choice. You know, it's very, you know, maybe a less traditional path. So, you know, it's a journey, and in my, take everything everyone tells you with a grain of salt, but the advice is really, you know, in the 20s, is in my 20s at least, or when I was starting, you know, it's a bit of a long journey that you just kind of have to really prepare yourself psychologically for. And I think organizations like VAFF, you know, organizations like the DGC, the support that they lend you, you know, it's really helpful, because it's not just as easy as deciding being a director. You know, it's quite a process. So I remember when I was, I think the second Vancouver Regional Film Festival I went, they had invited Justin Lin to talk. And that was so inspirational to me because he was a guy who was up there working at like a very high studio level, and someone asked him, what has your experience been like being an Asian filmmaker working with the studios? And he basically said, they don't care that I'm Asian. All they care is whether or not I make money for them or not. And I think there's a huge part of this as well, where there's a business aspect that you're trying to wrap your mind around as you move into this business. So, I think there's a lot of work to be done in the business, and I'm so grateful that we're having these type of conversations, and people's eyes are being opened. At the same time, this is just a incredibly brutal, tough business at times. At times heartbreaking business to get into. And I think that's something that's felt across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. A lot of you talked about the chicken and egg situation, and Tiffany, you mentioned producers are having a tough time finding directors. But if they're looking for directors in a pool of 5%, and they're looking for Asian directors, and there are directors that haven't been able to get in based on some of the potential challenges that we've discussed here, then they are going to have a tougher time finding Asian directors when they only have 5% to look at, and some of them maybe haven't had the opportunity to get in like we all.
Yeah, I never want to make excuses. There are always an opportunity for them to hire, a BIPOC filmmaker to direct their show, or to interview. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a club. People hire who they know and who they get recommended. And if the majority in our industry are white, they hire their grips, their gaffer, their AD, their PM, and then all of a sudden you might be watching a show that's all BIPOC people, but you turn around and everybody's white, and you're like, what the hell? What's this all about? And that's what it is. I mean, people hire who they know. It's a business, like what Jeff said. They just want to make money, and they just want it to be efficient. So they want to hire who they know, who that's recommended, who was on that last big show, and then they just bring people up, and it's like a big freaking cycle all over again. And it's like for me, what I'm excited about is it's like all eyes are looking at every single production company right now, and it's basically like, all right, you guys are all called out. We're all watching you now. You guys can't just like swish it underneath the rug anymore. Everyone is watching. Everybody's watching, and time for change is happening. And I believe it. That's what makes me at least sleep at night, is to know that that's going to happen. I just want to try to be as optimistic as possible. I need optimism in my life. So that's what I'm thinking about. And that's what I want to encourage people moving forward, is that, if you feel like it's unfair that you haven't gotten a chance to be interviewed for a gig, and you feel like, it's just, if it's not around your credentials, and like, because that's also really real, it's about like having those conversations. I mean, I think it's really difficult. I'm not going to lie. I think there's also a personality also in this industry that they don't teach you in film school. I'm not sure about other people's statistics or on how many people are still in film that went to film school. Mine isn't very high, personally, but I think there's something around the personality as well. And how do we also nurture that, build up the confidence, and also understanding that 50% of this is networking, how are you in a room, and how do you take those conversations, and so that there's another one that follows up for you to get that gig, So, I mean, there's so many aspects to it that I think that they're falling short on in school. That's a whole other conversation, though.
So,
yeah, so we've been doing, I think you're absolutely right, Tiffany. We've been trying to launch a lot more training opportunities for our members around specifically just pitching yourself, how to be in a meeting, how to network, how to create work that gets you noticed, because that's definitely, no matter who you are, kind of getting the job is the hardest part of the job. Actually directing the thing and can often be just the fun part at the end of the years of struggle just to try and get there. And so we've been trying to do a lot more to kind of train people of that, because Jeff's right, that it's really based on your work and your ability to kind of promote yourself and promote the work that you're hoping to do for that person. And just to add one last thing to what you guys are saying, I think the DGC can do better and continue to do is is to make visible members who want to be visible, that are from the BIPOC community or the female community, or any other type of underrepresented group. One of my other people on the directors advisory committee with me is Nimisha Mukherjee, who's an incredible filmmaker and director of television, and she's South Asian. And she said the reason she started in documentary when she started, and her documentaries have been really successful, even though she wanted to do narrative stuff, was just she didn't see anyone like her who was doing narrative stuff. So she just assumed that that door was closed to her. And so now that she is directing television and moving on to hour-long work and kind of bigger stuff, she really wants to try and be as visible as possible, and the Guild's trying to help her be as visible as possible, so that it just shows other filmmakers who might be looking at the industry that it is possible, to encourage them and maybe their parents that it's a viable career.
I wanted to touch on a couple more things here. We do have some questions coming in. So some of the questions coming in are regarding welcoming and building a wider range of diversity in the ranks. And the question here is question 9 from, I apologize for the pronunciation, Gayatri. And the question from Gayatri is the DGC considering any programs like on-set shadowing for diverse and or emerging directors? Is there anything like that that we can look to, or any opportunities that you can speak to, Tiffany or Zach?
Yeah, a lot we're trying to do. Obviously, right now it's a little tricky because adding one more person to set is sort of being a challenge. But there's a bunch of different programs that traditionally the DGC didn't have a lot to do with shadowing, or as we're trying to call it, director observing.
Yes, we're done with the shadowing. Oh
yeah,
my God,
director observing. Copy.
Yeah, we're trying to turn director observing into an official position, like that. When you have an observer on set, that everyone sees that person as their future boss, not just some sort of student who's in the corner who's sort of mildly interested in directing. That everyone that there's a career path there. That, you know, once you have the credits and you're interested in the show and you've met the people involved in hiring, that part of your hiring process is to be director observing, and hopefully that leads to doing an episode. We're in the process of launching a few programs. Some are really exciting because they're paid positions. So one's being done with the CMF called the Action Program, which is placing female directors on sets and paying them to be director observers and then direct episodes. There's other programs where we're interacting with the networks themselves. So for example, Netflix and Warner Brothers, which are two of the biggest employers in BC, are beginning to establish director training programs and observer programs in BC and in Canada, mostly because the government's forcing them to. But they, we're starting to be very integral and being there to make sure that we're supplying our members, and that directors.ca, which has the ability to filter by diversity characteristics, is at the center of that. It's a challenging thing because there's a lot of shadow programs in the country. The vast majority of them, it's tough because they're in our opinion, sometimes they're placing people too early in their career on those sets, and we think that to really move the needle, director observers should be people that could direct the next episode, but just need to be on that set to meet the people and become familiar with everything, so that, because shadowing can be tricky because it sort of labels you as someone who's in training rather than someone who could be everyone's boss next week. So we're trying to kind of rebrand that and be at the center of it, placing our members so that people are excited and interested and see shadows, I should say, directors, observers, I should say, as people that are being trained to do the job next week, so that it really makes it a highway to getting new voices onto set, rather than just training them and then letting them off into the wind.
Yeah, I was that person. I was left in the wind. I observed for 2 months on 2 different shows over the summer. And in fact, the funny thing is that I actually, the first directing, like, for television opportunity that I got was was because I was sitting at a round table with one of the executive producers, director of Sinking Ship, JJ. And so we were both nominated for a DGC award that year. And so we were all forced to watch each other's work. So he watched the Apology documentary, and then I watched Odd Squad, and I loved the work that JJ does. And then after the roundtable, I was like, hey, can we have coffee? And then he loved the Apology, and I was just like, you know what, I love an opportunity to be able to observe if you have anything coming up that, you know, you could squeeze me into just observe on set, because that's kind of the trajectory I want to head into, is to start doing some fiction work. And he's like, you know what, I don't think you should just observe. I think you should direct an episode. But yes, of course, we'll start you up with observing something to prepare you to direct your first episode. And that opportunity and that confidence and that support, I will always speak to that as like, I wish everyone can see that and see the path from observing into actually getting an episode, like the next step, because that to me was a life changer for me. And also the way that I do believe that observing should lead to. NBC has an incredible program where they actually have, it's written in the contract, is like, you observe for this 1 month and then you will get a block the next month. It's like written in stone. It's no like guessing if you'll be there. For me, I think that, you know, like what you said, Zach, is like, you should, sometimes people are observing and it's too early in their career, but they're still doing it just to get a sense of what it's like. That's one thing. But I think majority of people who are choosing to observe are quite ready and wanting that chance and that opportunity. I think for me, what I did, and it was just great advice from other directors that observed, is when you get a chance to observe, pretend that you are prepping for your episode, so that you're not just like wandering around and trying to figure it out. And often the director is also incredibly busy just trying to prep for their episode, that it's hard for them to focus on how they can, you know, share or train you. So for me, I took this great advice, is just like, pretend as if that you were prepping that episode, and speak to the director you're observing that this is what you want to do. And so that there is actual tangible things that you can share and get feedback on, so that it is almost feels like that it is your show. And then when the show goes to camera, you can see whether or not you compare your notes to the director's notes to see how far off or how different or whatnot. But that's like really tangible outcomes that you can have during your period of 2-3 weeks of observing. And it's not so like trying to figure out what you should be doing with yourself, you know. But I think that that's why, yeah, you can be completely lost in the whole observing and totally be mistaken as a background or a student. Yeah,
totally. It's a huge, very learning. If you really if you write down how you would block a scene and then they block it, and how you shot list it and then you see how they cover it, that's where you're going to really benefit. If you're just standing there to wait and eating crafty, you're not going to get much out of it.
It's very interesting, Tiffany. You're talking about your opportunity to meet that director and eventually get the opportunity to hopefully work with him, and that was an opportunity that came from being both involved in the DGC. So
yeah,
that's
it was. Yeah, it was created by the DGC because they encouraged a roundtable discussion for all the DGC nominees that year. And so that roundtable conversation, it was myself who had a feature doc, and they did something really clever. They put a bunch of directors that were nominated that are from different genres. So mine was doc, Cardinal was on there. So that was is that a limited series drama? No, it's not limited series. It's a series, but it's drama. And then,
it started as a limited series.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. And then there was JJ, who had Odd Squad, which is a children feature that was nominated. And then who else was there? There was Viking as well. So you couldn't put like totally different directors around the table to talk about their work and to talk about their nomination together, but that encouraged us to watch each other's work and then get to know each other, and then that turned into, you know, other conversations, which that was really cool for me.
So we have a couple more questions that I want to get here. So really quickly, so question number 5. This is a question from Lonely Arts Productions, and Lonely Arts Productions asks, as a DGC assistant director member with short film experience, what would you recommend be the next step to upgrade into the DGC director category?
Yeah, I mean, one brief, if you're a BC member, we have, and I think Ontario has a similar thing. Every year we actually finance 2 short films a year, one for a director member, one for a non-director member. So that would be ADs, PAs, PMs, LMs, all that type of stuff. I mean, the reason I'm mentioning that is, like Jeff was saying, really all you can do to be a director is direct. You have to make stuff, and it is a privilege, and you have to be in positions to do so. There are some opportunities in BC. Obviously, we have the Crazy Eights, which is maybe a world-class opportunity for any directors looking to create work. It's probably the best short film program in the world for kind of jump-starting your career. And as a DGC member, you get a free application to the Crazy Eights each year. But you just have to create stuff and keep creating it and keep getting it in front of anyone you can meet in a networking thing, get in front of agents and getting it in front of producers and meeting everyone at the film festival. And you really got to hustle, because showing your work and meeting people is eventually how an opportunity is to come to you. If you make something and then it's your calling card, it's your short that you use to break into the industry, and then for whatever reason, it's been a few years and that opportunity never came, unfortunately, you have to make something new. Because after a while, that sort of ripple that happened from creating that one thing is going to dissipate. And you just have to keep creating. And it might be something that's smaller budget than that big thing you did a few years ago. But it's more important to kind of keep creating and keep showing people that you are a director. If you have a day job, you're an AD, or you have a day job that isn't in the film industry, that's what we're going to assume you. And only by directing stuff and putting it out there does it program them to think of you as a director. And with each thing, you meet new people. Each job, work leads to work. And it can be commercials, it can be music videos, it can be smaller stuff. And eventually you'll start getting hired for small things, and hopefully your hustling puts you in position to do an MOW or to have an agent sign you at one of our, we do meet your matches for agents. And the last one we did in BC, we got 4 of our members represented. So, your first goal really is to make stuff. Hopefully that stuff either gets you a job or gets you an agent, and then the agent gets you a job. And then you just got to keep making stuff. And like Jeff was saying, it never gets easier. The struggle to get your first job, it's as hard to get your second job. And because you always want to keep doing something bigger and better than what you just did. And the industry just wants you to do what you did or worse. So you're always struggling to kind of prove yourself forever. There's always a catch-22, which is fine. You're signing up for the struggle of being an artist. And that's why I don't really think of choice. I think of, if you can choose to do anything else, you probably should, because it's a very painful existence, but it's the only choice, because that's how it's the only way you can be fulfilled. So if you make something, it'll lead to getting hired on a job, and then you'll become a director. There's no, unlike the positions in the DGC, like being an AD, there's no upgrading. There's no, you take a course and now you're a second, and you take another course and now you're a first. It's just down to your work and someone hiring you to do that work.
All right, we're moving on to another question. Question number 7 by Robin Chan. I promise I've never heard of this person. He's not a good friend of mine, Robin Chan. Does the DGC provide crew availability lists, ADs, location managers, etc., to non-union productions?
So we have the production list, which is the list of every DGC signatory production. You can go to the website right now and see that, which can be helpful for crew and other people knowing what's shooting. And we have directors.ca, which lists all the directors we have, but it's not the same as we don't have the same thing that these ADs are available right now, and we don't have that for directors, mostly because directors, there's such a long tail to the hiring process that just because you're shooting next week doesn't mean you're not available for a job 6 months from now or a year from now. And sometimes hiring is that far. So it doesn't really make sense to kind of say which directors are available and which aren't, because we're all sort of available depending on when it's shooting, and often as a director, you can do, I'm currently, working on 6 projects. So it doesn't really make, it's not the same as an AD who just can work on a project at a time.
Just to answer that, like also on the availability list and the advanced member search, so you can like turn yourself on or off in terms of whether or not you're available. I'm just like, I'm available forever, everybody, even though I'm like sweating and not even sure how I'm going to finish a film literally this month. But yeah, you could turn it on and off and to see which members are available and not available. And then also, I'm not sure if, because I haven't actually gone into what the AD database looks like. I feel like it's the same thing. Am I right? When you click into available second AD, third AD and stuff, that you could see.
Yeah, it's similar. I think it's just that the industry is used to using the avails list for all the other positions. It's not used to using it for directors. So even if you are a DGC member and you list on there and you're good about turning off your profile or not, I don't think a lot of people go there. They go there for every other position, which is why we sort of are spreading directors.ca across the country so that sort of becomes the destination,
right?
For employers.
And then that other question was around whether or not was a question for non-union productions. Well, it's kind of funny. Every newsletter we get, like, you know, the non-signatory projects to like basically stay away or something like that. That's the way I look at it when they like post productions that are non-signatory. It's just like, don't go on these projects, everybody. But there is a list also for projects. I'm not sure if that was part of the question, but I just thought I should.
Yeah, and generally commercials are non-union, so that's all sort of non-union work.
All right, that takes us to question number 8, and this comes from Italia Ricci. And Italia Ricci asks, having joined at this point, is there anything that you wish you knew about the process that you could have told yourself? Maybe I'll take that to Sharon. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, you know, I've always kind of had this mentality of not rushing. Take your time. This is your journey. You know, this is your life, your craft, your dreams, and make sure you don't get caught. There's so much crap about like what you should do or you shouldn't do, and yes, for sure, like take that in and then decide, choose for yourself what works for you. But you have to really get to know yourself. You know, I wish I'd kind of dug more into like what I want versus what the industry needs from me earlier on. And I think it's the same conversation with agents and the DGC. It's like, don't rush into getting an agent. Like, I wish that I spent more time deciding what I wanted out of an agent as opposed to being like, yes, like I'll take anyone, you know? But yeah, I think we have to take responsibility for our own mental health and our own, you know, life, and decide how much time you want to spend on your career and what you want and what's going to make you happy. I don't know how helpful that is.
I think it's really helpful, and you know, especially the point over mental health. I think, you know, that's definitely a conversation that's been starting, and you know, becoming a filmmaker, it's, you know, I think one of the really hard things about becoming a filmmaker or director, right, is your identity as a person and your identity as a filmmaker start kind of getting mixed, right? So when things happen that are very good or bad as a director, you know, those things start kind of feeling good or bad as a human being. And, you know, again, as you're going into this, just realize that those are two separate things. And as you go through your career, you're going to have the high times are never as high as they should be, and the low times are never as low as they should be. You know, it's kind of a slow, you know, it kind of goes like this over time, you know, and, you know, you have to find a way to be able to, again, like embrace the lifestyle of what the journey requires, and be okay with it. And ultimately, that, you know, for me, the thing that I've always found has helped me most, more than anything, is just finding, you know, not like, you know, there's like networking and stuff, and, you know, you go to, you know, a lot of events, and, you know, that's all great. And, you know, I have a ton of contacts, you know, but in terms of like my film family of people who I truly trust, that I'm kind of in it with for the long run, and they're not all filmmakers. They're just kind of people who are in the business. Some of them, are kind of even slightly adjacent to the business. I mean, that's so important. Find a group of people that you really can you can talk to and that have your back. And I think that's also, I think that has really, I've been very, very, very grateful for throughout my career.
Can't hear you, Arnold.
I apologize. I muted myself and then I forgot to unmute myself. That's a bad, for moderators, that's probably the worst mistake you can make, and I just made it. I just outed myself. Okay, here we go. So in terms of being an up-and-coming documentary director out there looking to follow in your footsteps, Tiffany, and carve their path as a documentary director, do you have any advice for them, A? And B, do you think that being a member of the DGC as a documentary filmmaker means something different? You alluded to that, but if so, how?
I think that's a great question. And I mean, the first part of your question around, was it like how to be, or how is it like being a documentary
What would your advice be
filmmaker or
for a
getting
young
into it?
up-and-coming director or up-and-coming director who's thinking about following in your footsteps?
I was like, don't! No, I'm just joking. No, I am so grateful to having every opportunity and family and just my network of support to be able to be a filmmaker, a full-time filmmaker. And I never thought that would be possible and be a documentary filmmaker, to say the least, and that says a lot. Like, it is the privilege to be able to even be a creator is one that shouldn't be taken for granted. And yes, it takes a lot of work to doing it, and many years and grind. And for me to be able to be here today, to be able to do my own projects, pitch my own work, and get it funded and made, it's because of mentors and people I got to work with. The filmmaking is a collective, it's a family, it's never done by one person. And I think that when you want to stay in this, like when you want to be part of this and do this work, I think that you have to kind of, for me, and it took me a while to also learn this. Maybe it was after I got benefits and was able to get myself a therapist. That's very real. Okay. I mean, listen, like mental health and that whole conversation, like even talking about it with my family till this day, it's a challenge, but I think it's an important thing to know that it's like, a lot of that mentality that I kind of grew up with, which is, I'm not sure if anyone can relate to this. It's like, if you're not suffering, you're not working hard enough. Did anyone else hear that growing up? Feeling like, just keep your head down and work really hard, that worker bee, Asian mentality, do. I think that poses a lot of risk, especially being an independent filmmaker. And it wasn't until maybe like, I don't know, 7, 8, maybe 10 years in. So really quite recently in my career where I had to really check myself on that. And it's not about how hard you work and how much you could break yourself that you can see success. It's not that at all. I think it's actually the collective community that you can surround yourself, and they don't have to be filmmakers. I call it like your mini board. If you can have 3, 4, whatever sizable 2 people, that you can check in with as you continue through, so that you're not doing this alone. And you don't have to be part of a guild or a union to have that community. You can create a community just amongst like the people you have just in arm's reach. They should know what's up, what you're doing, what you're thinking, and I think that that's the beginning of at least a healthy path moving forward. I wish I had known that. I would have done things differently. I wouldn't have tried to think that I could take it on all on my own. That could have saved a lot of trips to my therapist's office. But like, I'm also learning of how to unlearn a lot of those cultural things that I grew up with as well, and the ones that like I struggled with on how to find that balance. You know, I think that the identity of like being in limbo of being raised in somewhat of a traditional Chinese family and going into, you know, also being raised in this North American educational world and where your peers all act in a different way. It's like just trying to find a middle ground that works for you and in a healthy way. Really applies to, like, for me, you know, moving forward and staying in documentary. Otherwise, I don't think I could stay in this industry. I think it would have probably killed me in many ways. You know, I needed that. I needed to check in with myself on that. And what was your second question?
The first was speaking to what advice you would have for anyone, and what are the differences with respect to the DGC for documentary filmmakers as opposed to fiction.
I mean, I like to say that I also do fiction for people out there, you know, just, but yes, at least getting into it more. But for documentary specifically, I think that, okay, so there are a few things with documentary is that, you know, being part of the guild, you know, you can choose to sign dispensations to work on smaller budgeted independent work as well. But also when you are part of the guild and you do, you know, have that representation, I think that for a large part of it, when you are on a doc project that is a signed DGC signatory project, automatically, for me, I can only speak for myself, is like the aspect of like knowing that I am supported, in knowing that I could check in and ask about like my contract or ask about these things that normally you would just figure it out on your own, or just not figure it out at all, and kind of like avoid all knowledge of your own rights moving forward onto projects. I think that that is a big thing for me as a doc filmmaker, because so often, as I said, you know, you wear 25 hats as an independent doc filmmaker. It's when I did my first episode, Dino Dana, and I saw like 50 people on set, and I was like, oh my God, I feel like a kid in a candy store. Look at all of these people. It's amazing, you know, and it's a luxury really to have so much support to do this work. But with doc, you are often wearing a lot of different hats. And I think having a union and having that support is to be able to call in and to check in on your rights, also to get help, and to have that also, you know, the camaraderie of other doc filmmakers in the guild that I can access and speak to. That makes a huge difference. And in terms of like, I will speak to this. I mean, if people know that you're a DGC member, part of the guild, and you're a doc filmmaker, if they don't want to be a signatory and they don't want, so yeah, you can potentially lose out on a job as well, you know, and that's also very real. But that's also something that I think we're right now in this moment just trying to figure out what the balance is of how do we try to, you know, change that mentality of like, you know, doc directors being underpaid, overworked. How do we support them, but how do we also allow them to still be hireable? Because that's a real thing, you know, and so often people will just take the job and do whatever just to make ends meet, you know. And so I think that that's a real thing that people also have to consider. And it's something that, you know, for me, it's like I try to be able to find the work and do the work that is going to be signatory, that will allow me to have the producers pay into my benefits. Ironically, I just so happen to also be my own producer too. So it's like I'm wearing, again, the dual hats as well, which is a challenge too. But it's also, I think we're also trying to set a standard out there so that, you know, for the next generation of doc filmmakers, that they won't have to be underpaid and overworked. I think that we're also thinking about, the future as well for our documentary industry.
All right, we're getting close to being out of time. I wanted to touch on just a couple of quick things here before we run out of time. So first of all, Zach, I didn't get to ask you yet, but if you can tell me if you have any piece of advice for people out there that may feel that they want to pursue a career in directing, and where the DGC falls into that. And for some people, they've been mentioning that, you know, it feels like a little bit of a daunting process. How would you respond to that, and how would you articulate any advice to them?
Yeah, well, my advice would be separate from sort of the DGC answer. From the DGC side, I think it's a my experience has been it's a very friendly organization. You can call the front desk and talk to any of the people in the guild, even if you're not a member and you're just curious and you want to know more, and the applications people, they will take your call, they will walk you through it, they will answer your questions. You can reach out to me at any time. It's a very friendly place, and even if you're not a member, we do a lot of reach out with people that aren't yet members, hoping to get to a place where they are members. So I wouldn't be scared of it, and just be aware of it, and talk to the people that are involved with it. And at film festivals, often DGC is running parties and there's staff there and stuff. So just become aware of it, and ask any questions, and join when it's appropriate. On the advice side of things, the biggest lesson I learned really had to do with sort of happiness. When I was sort of starting out, I was basically putting all of my happiness at a point in the future. I was basically like, I will be happy once I make my first film, or I will be happy once I make a film that is in theaters, or whatever. And then being unhappy for the other 95% of the time until I achieved that thing. And it was my dad who helped me realize that if you're sort of become oriented, you'll spend 95% of your life unhappy with that 1% where you finally are happy, but then you're going to have a new goal. And so instead, being much more focused on the process and enjoying every day and enjoying the team that you're working with, and knowing that the struggle is the process. And so know that you're doing the thing we're all doing, and you already have made it. If you're struggling, you're here, you've made it. That's what you're signing up for. And so that's, don't feel bad if you haven't achieved your goal. Just be careful not to put all your self-worth and happiness in the achievement of that goal. Instead, find fulfillment in the little achievements every day, and then make sure you're enjoying. That's why your team is so important. Make sure you're enjoying the tiny little bit you move the rock each day. That's the actual work, and make sure that that's enjoyable.
That's great advice, Zach. We're running out of time, but I want to give everyone 20 seconds to talk about their next projects and where potentially people can watch for you, social media handles, or follow your career. So let's start with Zach.
Sure. You can find me at Zach Lepofsky on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Also, I have an app called Shotlister, which is an incredibly powerful app for doing shot listing. You can find that at Shotlister app on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. Contact us, say you saw this thing, and we'll send you a free copy just for watching this hour and a half. And I've got all sorts of amazing projects. Who knows if any of them will ever actually happen? They're all cooking. They're all cooking and simmering on the burners, and we'll see. Hopefully, one day soon.
All right, Zach, I'm going to hold you to that. I actually used Shotlister on All in Magana, my last feature. So awesome. Thank you for that. And so, so anyone email in and you'll get a copy of Shotlister. Next, Tiffany, 20 seconds.
Ooh, 20 seconds. Okay. So we are right now in the festival circuit during COVID, which is really fun and weird. We just had our world premiere at TIFF, and now heading to Doc NYC for a film called Sing Me a Lullaby. But all you Canadians out there, you can actually watch the film right now on CBC Gem. Today it is starting to air. So that's Sing Me a Lullaby on CBC Gem. And I am in post-production and needing to deliver a film by the end of this month, which is called Until Further Notice. It was part of the COVID relief funded projects by CBC. So look out for that. That's Until Further Notice. And I am in the works of writing my first feature fiction film based on Sing Me a Lullaby. So yeah, I'll see you in 10 years, everybody.
That's great. Jeff, how about yourself?
I don't really have like a director social media handle, but you can kind of like find me on Facebook. I'm sure I'm there, and I'm actually working with Sharon on a project that it's a movie with this company called Wattpad. They're really they're kind of a tech literary platform, and they've done some movies that have done well on some of the streaming services. So we optioned a book that had quite a few reads, and was looking for someone just to bring a really authentic and unique view to it. So I was very, very lucky to get Sharon on board that project. And that's more as a producer and as a filmmaker. Just looking to do a sequel to a movie that we did last year. We were at a streaming service that lasted for about 6 months that no longer exists. So we are now shifting to a more traditional format. That's basically that's it for me.
All right, we look forward to seeing that. And Sharon.
I just want to quickly say that if anyone hasn't seen The Apology and Sing Me a Lullaby and Code 8, you really have to see those films by Tiffany and Jeff. They're
definitely see the other two, because one of those is one of Peabody.
Oh no.
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I thought we lost it for a second. Sorry.
But yeah,
oh my God.
Sharon, please continue.
So I'm currently directing on Kim's Convenience. We're going to be wrapping next week. And then working on this project with Jeff has been really, really fun and exciting. So yeah. And yeah, also working towards my first feature and developing other things.
We're starting a karaoke band as well,
Oh, awesome. I want to join that karaoke band too then. All right. So unfortunately, the panel is coming to a close. That's all our time today. I just want to thank our amazing panelists. Zach Lipovsky, thank you. Sharon Lee, Jeff Chan, and Tiffany Xiang, thank you so much for taking time today. Of course, we want to thank the DGC BC. We are grateful for their efforts to support diversity in our film industry. Thank you to them. So I want to take...
and thanks to you, Arnold, for being a great moderator and host for this. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I had a great time listening to you, and I'm going to definitely follow up on all your films and watch them all. I'm going to force my kids to watch them. We're all going to watch it together, so it's going to be great. So if you like this panel, please check out some of our remaining live VAFF industry panels, including Introduction to the UBCP ACTRA Ultra Low Budget Program. That's this Saturday at 2 p.m. PST, and Eliminate Hate, Model, Minority, Myth on the Film, this Sunday at 2 p.m. We also have more live filmmakers talk over the weekend, and you can find more information on that at vaff.org. Also, as usual, help us share our message and your experiences with us on social media at #VAFFvirtual, #VAFF. I would be remiss not to offer our gratitude to the amazing VAFF board members and the volunteers who make this all happen, including the producing team who works so hard behind the scenes of this panel to bring this panel to life as well. And finally, can't leave without thanking our audience. Thank you so much for joining us today and supporting diversity in film and TV. For the Vancouver Asian Film Festival, I'm Arnold Lim. Good night.